Okay, welcome back. Thank you. My name is Tom Whitford. I am the Learning Design Lead at Curio. I will be the MC for the rest of this morning and this afternoon. And I have a bit of a strange disease, which means I can't look at any experience and not think about learning outcomes. So hopefully you've all had a chance to mingle. But what I'd like everyone to do now is just to stand up and perhaps find someone around them, introduce yourself, and make a commitment to chat to them during your lunch break. Okay, hopefully that was a valuable networking opportunity for you all. I should say, for those at home, you can put your contact details, I think LinkedIn bios and whatnot, into the Slido Q&A app, and that will help as well. And feel free to connect with each other. For those in the room, we noticed some of you were posting questions to the panel. You can also just raise your hand. It's pretty old-fashioned, actually, to do that. We love running a classroom up here. I'm going to be hand-passing now to David and Pascale, who will be talking about our next session. It will be a short panel. Again, I'll be running around the room, I think, for Q&A at the end. So I'd like to welcome David, who is my boss, so I'm actually on my best behaviour. All right, round of applause. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're on. We are indeed. Thanks, Tom. And from someone who used to teach 300 plus first year medical students about reproductive physiology, I've got a bit of a knack for trying to get people to come back into a room again. So welcome again, and thank you for joining us again after morning tea. I'm going to invite Pascale up to the stage and just say a few words about her. Bonjour, Pascale. Professor Kester, as many of you know, actually has a background in marketing and in particular in consumer behaviour, which is a really different background to come into running a university. If you want to put really the consumers, or in our case the learners, the students, really at the centre of the experience and be thinking about what are they needing, what are they looking for, and then how do we create an organisation and an environment around it, that's what we want to hear about, I think, from Pascale. So we're just going to have a short conversation about it. I'm going to try as much as I can to bring in the comments and questions through the Slido at the same time. So if you're online at home or in your office somewhere else, feel free to use the Slido. And as Tom said, if you do have a question and you want to raise your hand and bring it up probably towards the end, it'll be a little bit easier for the conversation, please do as well. So our theme, Pascale, is around connections, making universities and connections. How do we, are you on? Yeah? I meant the microphone, but yeah. Is it switched on?
Can you hear me? At the base.
Oh, there's a little switch. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, we're on. Hello.
It will work now.
Lovely, thank you. So the theme of the conference is around universities as the great connectors. How do we really connect that experience but put students at the centre of it all? How do we do it?
Well, I think it's probably never been as easy as right now, when the society and industry is just realising the kind of existential crisis that they have when they don't have the human capital they need. And I think university, and in the case of my university, dual sector university specifically, are actually perfectly poised to assist and partner with industry to develop the human capital that will keep them in business, but will actually keep society as a cohesive, purposeful society. So I think the role or the justification for the existence of university has never been as strong as now.
Oh, absolutely. I think so too. But if they are going to be the great connectors and they've got to bring in industry, academics, increasingly learning designers and sort of third space type providers, technology and platforms, and everything's changing at the same time, how do they make that connection? What things do you need to have in a university then, or capabilities, to really make the connections work? Because often academics, for example, they aren't formally trained in to do those sorts of things in some respects. Some of them are fantastic researchers, as we were talking about this morning. Mm-hmm. Great researchers doesn't necessarily mean great teacher. In some cases it does, of course, in my case it would have, but in most cases it did not.
Indeed.
So how do we get them to be able to make those connections? Because they become really the centre of that in that case, don't they?
And I think that particularly in Australia, where we tend to see a fragmented system, and there is the vet system, and there's the higher education system, there's the school system. I think all of that develops in ignorance of the fact that there's one central purpose to all of this, and that's the learner. So when you start actually focusing on the learner, you find that the rest is only scaffolding whatever's needed by that learner at that point in time. And I'm thinking here not just about the sort of year 12 who needs to find a particular degree to enroll in, but as we look at the repurposing of some industries, the end of some industries, and the emerging of others, the whole upskilling and reskilling, the whole equation about how do you partner with a learner and sometime with an industry or a government partner or whatever, to actually develop the human capital. And if you remain centered on the learner, I think you actually do not have, and you can become blind to these somewhat artificial dichotomies that the Australian system likes to entertain so much.
Well, do you think the learner has changed?
I think the learner
Let's
has
not
changed.
talk about the five-letter C word, but has the learner changed since you started back in the academic world to what they are now? Like, have they, in ways they work, they behave, they learn, they consume?
Well, I think the expectation of the learner has changed, and I think that their willingness and capacity to express their expectations in a way that is perhaps a little bit more strident than what has happened in the past is actually a welcome development. I think we should be grateful that the students, the learners, are willing to actually sit around the table and help us devise the kind of experiences that is going to be, positive and affirming for them. I think that notion that we do things to students, from exams to the structure of our degrees, and deprive them of any agency in the process, I think is really problematic. Because if you have a learner that is not engaged and doesn't understand why it is that you have to do these particular things in order to demonstrate, for instance, a particular learning outcome, you are just creating rules that, with today's learners, are going to be seen as antiquated and helpful, discriminatory, and it's sometimes we only do it because we teach by reminiscence. One of the problems that we have with academics is that they remember with startling precision exactly the exams that they sat when they were students themselves. And for some strange reason, they absolutely want to replicate this treatment to the new learners. And
I suffered through it, so shall you.
Exactly. Yeah. And when you actually query that and you say to an academic, do you feel that the learners today are the same as what you were 30 or 40 years ago? No, they're not at all the same. Well, if that's the case, what makes you think that what worked for you, assuming it did, is actually going to work for them? And actually, if you start looking at what is today's learner needing and what it is that they are expecting, and then you recalibrate around that, you find that you have a partnership that will go not just for the one degree or qualification, but will actually be a lifetime partnership, because those people inevitably will come to a point in their career where they need to kind of get to another industry or another level, and they will need some support. They will need some assistance to get them ready, and that's the role that universities should play, I think.
No, I completely agree with you. And I guess, is there now a, you might say, competitive advantage of being a dual sector university in some cases? Because really previously we all thought about it, those of us who have worked in them and an advisement, gone, oh my God, they're tied up in so much different complexity. They've got different governments that they're reporting to in state and federally. They've got different policies and regulatory environments, and they've got ASQA and everything else. Like, they're absolutely complicated beasts, but is maybe now their time?
Well, I have to say, this dichotomy, particularly between the vet and the higher education sector, is something that is reinforced by all the agencies and all of the funding mechanisms that actually thrive on them being two separate sectors. Again, if you're driven by the fact that the learner is at the center, then really those distinctions are somewhat unnecessary. Certainly when you talk to industry, I have never encountered somebody who says, I need people, but I need these for vet and I need these for higher education, and I don't want to talk to the same people at all about this. I want to have a separate conversation. They come to you and say, this is what my business, or this is what my state, or this is what... this is what's needed.
That's my problem.
And then after that, it's okay, well, do you have a current workforce that needs upscaling? I mean, do you need new people, or do you have the capacity to add value to the people that you have so that they can have a fulfilling career in whatever the next phase is? And I like to always think about our teachers. One of the things that people realized is that the quality that made you a good teacher during a pandemic was not necessarily going to be the quality that would make you a good online teacher. All of a sudden, there was a level of digital awareness, digital fluency that became necessary. And it became necessary overnight. So these are the kind of struggles that industries go through all the time. And they have people who are good people, who know the business very well, but all of a sudden there's a technology change, and that whole cohort is not able to actually provide the same value and the same assistance. And I think this is where we should actually have that lifelong expectation of constantly developing human capital and of doing this with purpose and deliberately. And I think that's a dual sector university is much better placed, and there's only 6 in this country, 4 of them in Victoria. Somewhat mysteriously. But the reality is that they are all equally dedicated to this notion that this dichotomy is not helpful, and certainly industry doesn't relate to it at all.
Do you think there's problems with it, though, in terms of trying to get them to connect across those different parts of the university? Because often they're separated out as separate beasts, as opposed to a disciplinary, if you want to think about how do you cut the beast up. And in your role, I'm sure you've thought about it, because the university's sort of moved between vice-chancellors going one way or the other in some respects.
Well, you know, in 2020 they all went the same way, which was out. But the reality of that particular equation, and status is important. So I was struck when I arrived at Swinburne about the fact that people in the vet area were very pleased that they had their own deputy vice-chancellor. And that was, to me, reinforcing the fact that there were 2 parallel streams, and I kept on saying, well, what of the learner? It makes no sense to me that we are organizing things in that silo versus that silo. And the most pushback I got when I went around to our campus in Croydon and Wonde is people from the vet sector saying, oh, but we used to have a deputy vice-chancellor, now you're taking it away. And my sense was to say, we're taking it away because we now want one academic portfolio that is all about the education and the value that we can provide to the learner. There is no shame in that. And they went, oh, okay then. So it's not because you don't like us that you haven't got a deputy vice-chancellor for vet. So sometimes people get caught on strange manifestation of what they saw as respect. To me, the true respect is to absolutely do what needs to be done for the learner, whoever the learner is. And at Swinburne, we believe very strongly that we're there to really open the door to a tech-rich future to people from all backgrounds. It's a very strong commitment that we have, and one that is translated in our RAP. We've got an Elevate RAP. We believe in helping Indigenous people to span across the digital gap, and this is actually our mission, and we want to do that with recent immigrants, and we want to do that with women in STEM, and it's about people from all backgrounds that are all entitled to thrive and succeed in a tech-rich future.
So how does technology then enable that, to be able to really enable that access and equity?
So we have, for instance, in our Swinburne Online cohort, a vast majority of people who are in regional Victoria or even interstate. We have lots of single mums that have absolutely no chance of coming to campus at Hawthorne for 3 years to do a degree, but are passionate about their ambition to become a teacher or a nurse. And we assist because we actually do not expect them to have to come to campus.
So it's all of a sudden they can actually be wherever they need to be. How about with Indigenous peoples? How does it work with them? Have you had much experience with them? Because it's a harder cohort to reach often.
So 6 years ago, Swinburne had about 85 Indigenous, people who self-identified as Indigenous people. At last count, it was 850. Wow. In the space of 6 years, it has gone 10 times. And that, to me, is a reflection of what a dual sector university can do. Because for an Indigenous person who is first in family, the notion of just signing up on the dotted line for a 3-year degree is just so ambitious, and even in terms of their self-confidence. But if you start really cultivating the talent, and you say it's a certificate and it could lead to a diploma, and if you do well, it could actually lead to a bachelor, and it can lead to a master's, and it can lead, this is about opening the doors. It's not about making people's choices for them. It's about opening the doors and supporting people who actually want to, who understand that the future, whether you are wanting to work in the tech industry or not, the future is going to be infused with technology.
Whatever you do.
And people will not succeed in their future who are not fluent with technology. Whether they do a Bachelor of Arts or whether they do a business degree, they need to have that connection to the way the future unfolds. And I don't think we should be apologetic for that, because if the pandemic has proved anything, it's proved that actually technology keeps people together.
Yeah.
We would have had riots, we would have had people in the street had it not been for people's capacity to be able to work from home, connect with loved ones, even though you couldn't go more than 5 kilometers away. And I speak with a full understanding of a person who arrived in Victoria on day 1 of stage 4 lockdown in 2020. So the reality is that technology and people work together to make the world a better place, as was abundantly demonstrated during the pandemic. And that's the message that I want everybody to feel, that if the future is like this, help me be ready for it. And that's the mission of my university.
Yeah, absolutely. How do we then blend that experience to what's going to work for that particular student? But at the same time, we know that this is research informed, this is best practice, this is what's actually going to get a better learning outcome or learning gain, as Stephen was talking about before morning tea, a better learning outcome potentially for the students. So how do you then improve that student agency? How do you bring them into the experience? Like, it used to be, certainly 20 years ago, it's like, Friday afternoon, I've got my 1 hour office hours, students come in if they're lucky, and I'll talk to them, and it's like, see ya. How do we bring them more into the experience now? And then, I guess, technology as the enabler of that. What are you doing at Swinburne to bring them in?
I think some students, so it's all about agency, and that means that some students do not want to engage in the way that we traditionally sort of reflect. So for some students, the notion of going and be wild on campus for 3 years holds no appeal whatsoever. Just think about that. And they should be allowed to engage as a student without feeling belittled because they don't enjoy going to the pub, actually. So it's about the capacity for the individual students to manage and control the sort of engagement they want to have. But for those who do want to engage, the notion that we could actually make decisions on things as obvious as the space in which they would actually be. I'm a fervent champion of co-creation because I have seen it at work. And when you design space with students as opposed to for students, you get something that doesn't look corporate, in which they feel comfortable. And if they feel comfortable, they stay longer. So the key to a sticky campus is actually to get the students in the room before the architects. Always before the architects. Sometimes, presumably, maybe instead of the architects. That's perhaps a more contentious view. But the reality is that at the moment, we are really engaging our students to discuss what would make them come back. What sort of place, and a lot of them remember the idea of a campus, but let's face it, a lot of them actually haven't had it. No. They have this kind of somewhat mediatized version of almost the kind of American campus dream, which was never there in the first place, and they kind of think that this is what they want. So, last Academic Senate, we had the students making an impassioned plea for, we want the lectures back. We want the lectures back. And my answer was, I'm not sure you do. You think you do, until you've gone to a few lectures where you lose the will to live after 10 minutes. And I think that what you're telling me is that you want good lectures that are worth coming to. And we can work on that. Yeah. So I'm prepared to give you a guarantee that every semester there will be on-campus lectures, but we will actually put in place a quality control where people who actually read their notes and maybe otherwise fantastic people. So I'm not saying that people who are not brilliant lecturers can't be good educators, but the way they educate is through the design of experiences and the design of pedagogy. They're not going to be the people who are going to make students feel that 1 hour or that couple of hours was worth living. Yeah. So we need to curate. We need to calibrate. And the students have told us in the past that after week 3, the lecture is perhaps not the best way to actually engage with them. Now, what they do need is to engage with each other. That's a really critical part of what the campus does. And so we tend to have space where they can engage with a tutor, they can engage with a lecturer. We need much more space where they can engage with each other. We run a big consultation in my first 6 months. What else do you do when you're sort of stuck at home? So you have a big conversation with staff and students. And the thing that I noticed about Swinburne is that the students who came to campus were quite transactional about it. I come to campus because I have to. There's a lecture then, there's a tutorial there, there's a prac. I have to go to that. They didn't get to be on campus because that's where they wanted to be. And to me, the secret of a good campus, and this is a task for all of us to reinvent, is a place where a student wants to be not because they have to be, but because they want to be. And my hunch, and this is consumer behavior coming to the fore, is that the thing that will make a difference is a social connection.
Yeah.
The thing they've missed most, the thing that will make them come back, is the friends they make, the energy they draw, the experience that they have. And so it's a different kind of campus. Less teaching space, more learning space. And that's a different equation altogether.
I think that's absolutely right as well. And if the campus is a destination, it's a little bit more like a Deakin Downtown type of feel.
No comment.
You'll have to come up with your own special name for it, I guess, wouldn't you? It couldn't be downtown. You'd have to think of something that starts with an S as well. But Swinburne's, like, if you haven't been to Swinburne's main campus in Hawthorne, it literally has a train station in the middle of it, a thing that Monash would probably literally kill for.
They'll just have to wait for it, I think. They'll just have to wait for it. There's one in the wing.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And I was there, as I was saying earlier, I was there on yesterday for their open day, and it is a massive car park that is there, and the commuting is not easy. It is a tough place to be. But with Swinburne, because of its location, it's got the train station there. How do you then craft the campus to create that almost blended experience now? A bit like what we have today, where there's cameras in the room. I'm looking at Slido, trying to make sure that I'm answering questions because I'm facilitating and sort of partly teaching in my own head at the same time. I'm listening to you. Like, it's a really different skill set that the academic teachers are going to have to really have in the future in that case, aren't they?
Well, the most confronting truth that academics have to perhaps face to is that learning spaces are not necessarily richer for the presence of the teacher in it. I know, it's confronting, but hear me out. I think that teachers are basically the designers of the experiences that the students have to go through in order to learn. So to me, the learning space should not be bookable by staff. It should only, if it's bookable at all, it should be bookable by students. And if you come to Glenferrie Station, which I intend to rename Swinburne University at some point, I'll die trying anyway, is you will just turn right and see there's a place called The Junction, and it's just a set of brick older houses, and we have just co-designed this as a new place. So think about sort of there is a very dark room for gaming, and I think after the 2 years of pandemic, any learner who wants to be in the dark on the screen probably deserves some support. But we also have, it's a bit like a co-workplace, and it is a place where people can be able to learn at their speed, with friends, project rooms, individual space with the capacity to project what's on your laptop. And this is just a sampler, because it's very difficult for people to imagine what they haven't seen. So we have it. The Juncture is a sampler, and then we're about to redesign the campus heart. And the hardest difficult for academics is to say, oh, we need this and we need this, and it's like, we're not doing it for you. Yeah. You've got offices. You've got the labs.
Want to be in either, but
we will do all the things that the staff need, but it doesn't need to be in the campus heart. The campus heart is first and foremost a place where the learners can be.
Yeah.
And they can learn. And it may or may not involve the presence of teachers.
Yeah, or a different type of teacher, or someone who's more in a facilitator type of role of someone's learning experience.
A coach.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Coach of learning. That's the academic role of the future.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one, because people who know Curio know that is a lot of what we do, but it's an interesting role and a difficult role in some cases, because it is really quite different to a classic teaching sage on the stage, or even running a tutorial type of experience. It's really quite different now. About 2 years ago, just a quick little sort of side story, I guess, while you have a quick drink of your water there, Pascale, but we were working with the University of Sydney. It was middle of the pandemic. They needed to move all of their first year science courses online, effectively. How do you create that experience for a start of first year, and in particular something like physics? And so for the first time, the academics were pretty much given free rein to rethink the experience. Because otherwise it was always, well, we have 3 lectures a week, there's a 3-hour practical class, and there's a tutorial. There's your experience, students. And all of a sudden they had to rethink it and go, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to get those concepts across? And to actually see them get released from those shackles in some respects, to be honest, was quite amazing and quite powerful for them, because all of a sudden they could say, well, the students have a mobile phone of some sort. Interestingly, it has a gyro device in it, so it can basically measure where it is in terms of time and space and how it turns and angles, etc. They got them to tape them to skateboards and get them jumping off stuff. They put in an app there so they could basically record the vectors and the trajectories of the thing going through time, and then creating a whole experience around it. So all of a sudden they were thinking completely differently about it, because they didn't have to just go, oh, we've just got to go and be in our lab class and we've been doing the same thing we have done forever. The other part that they absolutely loved about, and that was the professor of physics at the time who was involved in this, and who's quite a very well-known astronomer. The part that she loved is all of a sudden we put in Slack. So everyone knows, it's a sort of common communication tool. They embedded it into Canvas, the learning management system that we're using, and all of a sudden we had a whole community of the professors who were teaching it, the tutors who were teaching it, the lab demonstrators who were involved in it. There was 20 different academic staff involved in this one course normally, who never talked to each other at all. All of a sudden they're in the same environment as 500 students. And it was amazing to watch. The connections that happened, etc. Now they're trying to work out, well, how do we now bring that to life in the real sense of the campus? Do we keep doing these lectures? Do we just have Slack as our way of teaching in the future? What sort of technology do you think might actually therefore bring about that different experience?
So that's interesting. The way that you described this kind of necessary transformation, which I'm assuming happened before the pandemic.
Yep.
So, if I can reflect on the way that I did something similar in my previous institution, it was basically taking the opportunity of a new technology platform, like, we're going to change the LMS and we're going to go with Canvas in that instance. And then basically, sort of hardcore, you're not getting your old course on the new platform. It's not happening. If your course doesn't get transformed, it doesn't get into the new system. The fear of death is a very powerful thing. And so what happened is people said, okay, so you want me to imagine a different kind of delivery, but I've been teaching this course in the same way for 20 years, and don't worry,
I've always used.
Don't worry, I said, you're going to have at-elbow assistance. We're going to give you a student. And 7 hours of the student input for any course that needed to be put onto Canvas. It worked a treat.
Did you pay the students as well?
The students did it out of love.
Wow.
But the reality, and some of them did it out of frustration with the stuff that the reality is that that's what co-creation does.
Yeah.
It actually puts the user in the frame for how you need to do things that will work better. And what was really astounding is that it was an epiphany for a lot of the academics, because it was not a lack of goodwill on their part. It was a lack of imagination, because they were teaching by reminiscence, which tends to be my bugbear. I do not want people to teach by reminiscence. I want people to share with their current learner in the way that this current learner needs. And so just having a student at elbow can actually transcend quite a lot of technology. But in this instance, it was a technology shift that actually made it possible to say, it stops now.
Yeah, so it's technology as the catalyst in some respect for for a change, and an LMS change is probably one of the more painful things that a university or an education provider will go through every 10 to 15 years roughly. So if they're going to go through that process, as one of my former bosses used to say, don't waste a crisis and don't waste a change crisis. It's a great way of getting people to potentially move as well.
My metaphor was somewhat more colourful. I said, amputation is better than gangrene. And out of that transformation, in 18 months, we succeeded in having over 2,500 courses over, and about 750 disappeared. Because everybody agreed that the effort it would take to... What is it?
Yeah. So it's interesting then, because the model effectively is changing then. So what we're talking about is really designing and building these learning experiences before the student actually enrolls. So they're involved in the design process, a human-centered design process, to really build that experience. Whereas previously it was, well, I've got my lectures that I've built over the last 20 years and I change a couple of slides each time and then I deliver the same thing. So there's a lot more effort and you might say investment from the education provider up front in designing, curating, building that experience, the videos, the animations, the H5P stuff, all of those different pieces that need to come together to create that before the student even walks into the experience.
Yes.
It's a massive investment.
It is, but the beauty of this is that you get all that courseware, all those learning assets that you can then offer in various combination to various targets.
So tell us a little bit more about that. What's Swinburne doing in that space?
So one of the things that we do is that in terms of, for instance, the digital literacy that we were talking about before, is that there is a great deal of corporate need for this. There's a great deal of education need, both at vet and higher education. And some of the elements are the same element of courseware. It's just how you present them and you just have the capacity to just use those assets and leverage them across more channels, more markets, and more segments of learners. So yes, an upfront investment, but a payback that comes from the capacity to share it with more people in different ways.
Oh, it's really interesting. So there was one question that's sort of related to that I thought was quite interesting, other than some of the feedback about they love the Swinburne marketing strategy. Now it makes sense, I think. But which is really
next gen now.
So what is your opinion therefore on using e-portfolios to really create a roadmap for assessment that can basically go through from K-12 into life? How do we do that?
I think it's really powerful to actually have something that provides credentials to a learner through a multitude of systems. This is about creating a currency of learning. Where I am more anxious is if it is based on sequential assessment that are not geared to assessing learning outcomes. These e-portfolios only work if we have real credentials of learning. And the problem is that the exam and the way that we assess students tend to capture something that doesn't resemble learning outcomes.
Contrast X.
So we, for instance, in our design degree, we've decided to kind of throw away the grades altogether. And that's because when an architect becomes a professional architect, if the first design is not up to standard, they're not going to be given a grade and sent back to do something else. They're going to be sent back to do the same thing until it's good enough or even better. So that notion that actually the learning outcome is better generated by having the capacity to fail and to get feedback for failure, that's actually what innovation and enterprise is all about. People who actually want to optimize and get the perfect solution before they get anywhere don't get anywhere. So the notion that we actually insist on this kind of very, again, dichotomous view of you get a grade and then that's that, I think is totally antiquated. And especially these days when we expect people to sit quietly in a room with complete silence for 3 hours with a pen, with a pen, people, and we ask them to write for 3 hours. All the students come out and they go, occupational health and safety issues. They've never held a pen for that long. They've never been in a quiet environment for that long. They've never not had access to the internet. And what
Or the device.
what have we tested? The capacity to sit still with a little stick in their hand. How many employers will say, "Oh, this is a talent I need. Somebody who can sit quietly with a little stick in their hand." Except for the cricket club, maybe. Possibly. The reality is that we want to engage in the kind of learning outcomes that are going to be not only relevant today, but are going to be collectible throughout the lifetime of that learner, because we never know what the next opportunity will be. And the fact that they have that chain of achievement of learning outcomes that are real means that they've got a currency that contains value. And that's what it's all about.
So is that then what the role of being an alumnus of a university becomes? And therefore, how does a university fit into partly like they... Obviously, we could have a future of sort of like Webjet type of thing where people do bits and pieces all over the place and they piece together their own trip and off they go. But is there not a role then for universities, and in particular almost like a warranty, if you want to call it that, of continuing to keep people up to speed, up to date? And how do we do that lifelong learning piece? And I'll just preface with that was a question that came from someone that I've just sort of changed up a little bit.
So what you described first was what I call life.
Yeah.
Right? Bits and pieces of things that some of them work and some don't work. And, actually, increasingly employers are actually very keen to know what the life experience of the person is. In fact, I remember having this really terrifying discussion with somebody from Deloitte when they said, if they've got enough things going for them and they've been study abroad and they've done this and they've done that, we don't care if they've got the degree. This was a moment of realization. Actually, the degree is not the main part. It's the experiences and the development and the potential in that person that we're trying to develop. So I think we need to be trying to calibrate the sort of thing that can be evidenced and can be permanently acquired. Because otherwise, if you say, I remember once I went to this country and I was able to order breakfast. Well, that doesn't make you 25 years later a person that can demonstrate cross-cultural competence.
Yep.
But you might actually have a series of things that you do over time that can actually demonstrate that. So I think it's not a done deal that we've actually managed this, but at the time of cryptocurrency, at the time of blockchain, with the help of our alum, and it's interesting that you talked about the alums, because when we look at where our Swinburnes go, they go to our alums. Because our alums remember the transformational power of the work experience that they had in their degree. This is usually why they came to Swinburne, because of the work placement.
Yeah.
And so now they are queuing to actually get Swinburnes. We call them Swinburnes. And of course, those Swinburnes will actually become the building block of the kind of human capital they need. And so it's a very self-reinforcing cycle, and one that we quite like.
How do you bring then employers more into that? Because often if we take the sort of 70-20-10 approach of human development, I know it's a complicated and much maligned model, but it's one I guess those in leadership often talk about. And if 70% is really learning on the job and developing those skills, how do we then turn those into almost like an e-portfolio? How do universities start to accredit that someone has done certain things and has developed certain skills?
Absolutely. I mean,
the Deloitte University has done that for me.
You can do it in a number of ways. I mean, I come from continental Europe, which is not the kind of English model of university, where you didn't necessarily get credits for the internship that you did between your second and first year and between your second and third year and then for half of your third year, but you couldn't progress if you didn't do it.
Yeah.
So you don't get graded, but you don't progress if you don't do it. The first question that you ask, which is how do you get them back? You never let them go. If you actually have people who are entrepreneurial, who are going to be going into industry doing things, there's no reason why they should sever the tie. And so you don't have to get them back because they never left.
Yeah. So you've got to keep them engaged then in what Swinburne's doing, what the future of learning's looking like.
Right.
These are our new, dare we say, products in the market that might be of interest to you.
Exactly.
You've got to keep that experience
going.
How do you do that? Is it LinkedIn? Is it just really good marketing? How do you keep in there?
Well, I mean, some of it is enlightened self-interest.
Yep.
At the moment, I think a lot of people would say, if I know where there is talent and I can tap into it in the future, I'm not going to let that source of talent go too far away. This is momentarily, though, in Australia. Because of the border closure, people realize that all of a sudden, particularly for technology-type industries, most of the talent came from overseas because we actually don't have the pipeline. And it starts in primary school when we turn the kids off science. So it's going to be a 20-year fix. If anybody thought that we could just kind of, manage that. It's going to be a 20-year fix, but it has to start somewhere. But the reality of it is that it is an enlightened self-interest. If you can collaborate with an institution and in the process shape the curriculum and ensure that people know about your company and are interested in your industry, you can't go wrong.
Yeah. So Tom's appeared here next to me on my left. So I take it he's saying, have we got questions from the floor?
Questions from the floor.
Anyone? Otherwise, we will go for, go for it.
I was interested in why you shied away from the word product. University selling a product. I mean, ultimately now our students are demanding more of us and paying for it. Why shouldn't we see it as a product?
I think many of us who are around the sector, and I'm going to take the question even though this is really your show, Pascale, but those of us who are around the sector or have been around it for a while generally do talk about it as products because that's the sort of language that we're all sort of accustomed to these days, and particularly if you're in the online course management and OPM type of space, it's just the way that we all sort of think and speak because that's just how we talk about these things because they are products. But in the minds of more traditional academics, that's almost sacrilege in some respects to them. But yet, what we are seeing is that increasingly, if you are a subject, course, unit coordinator, convener, whatever role you want to call it, basically you run that course, your role in reality is that of a product manager. You are thinking about how do I market this course? How do I get students who are already in the campus or even in this undergraduate degree to want to do my program? How do I start thinking about how much money that actual program is even making to how much is it costing me to deliver that program? Is it a good quality program? Is it not? Has it got good resources in it? Has it not? So I think that sort of product mindset is coming in. It's just the word that we've got to get academics up to date with. Would that be a fair descriptor, or do you think it's deeper than that?
I think it's a bit more complex because as much as the learners, because they pay fee, or the taxpayer also pays fees and all the rest of it, there is a kind of confronting truth in saying that they're also the product. When you talk to industry, when you talk to government, actually it's the quality of your graduate. It's the productivity of your graduate.
You're delivering.
And so we do talk about our menu of products and we think about our programs, etc. But the reality of the value we produce is obviously in the research that we support and achieve. But it's also fundamentally in how good a product is that graduate. And that's confronting because, of course, no learner wants to be a product either. But that's kind of that's how I see it.
It is moving. Yeah. Another question from the audience up the back there, David, over here somewhere.
Good morning. This morning, Liz Johnson and Steve Parker talked about students dropping into campus, and you mentioned the same as again in this session. I'm really interested in what's the digital campus of the future look like, and what are the fun things that we're going to be building into this campus that will want students to drop into that as well as your physical campus. And second part of the question is, surely it's not the LMS chat room, but I'll leave that leading question.
I actually think that it is that social interaction. We need to emulate that in a way that is very realistic. So whether we do it through avatars, whether we do it through a different means, I think the campus experience that students miss the most is that interactive experience with others. And the beauty of technology is that if we can create social interaction between students of different background, then we can multiply that with technology, and people can be in a group on a project with people from other countries and from other ethnic background, and from, to me, there is a capacity to create an extraordinary global campus place in the cloud, which we, as much as we are internationalized on our campus, is not the same as the truly global campus experience we could do on the cloud.
Excellent. One final question?
Yeah.
No?
We've got about
2 minutes.
30 seconds, if anyone else.
The pressure is on now.
No?
Question.
All right.
Yeah, we've got one
Yeah,
there.
we do have one. Was that? Sorry. Where did I see it? Okay.
Hi, Pascale. You mentioned that engaging the students early on, understanding what they are looking for, what type of style they want in learning, things like that. So my question here is, sometimes, because I come from IT background, and what we usually, when we are interacting with customer, we say, sometimes, most of the time, customer don't understand what they really need. Mm-hmm. So when you are just interacting with the student to understand what they need, how you balance that? I'm just comparing that with a child who is looking for something like the child wants and what really helps the child. So the parents make the decision, right? So how you balance this?
It's a very good point. I would say that my default position is to actually see our learners when they come to us as adults. So it's about the kind of the capacity to test things and to achieve, and then kind of, I think very often we ask students to make decisions about qualification where it's way too early, because they don't even know what the discipline is. If it's not something they've done at school, they've got no idea, or they've got a very romantic idea about what it is that they are getting into. I don't know how many people went into law because of some television programs a few decades ago, and I hate to think about the number of forensic scientists that are cutting bodies left, right, and middle because of what they saw on TV. So I think experimentation is a very human, fundamental human way of learning, and I think that we should encourage people to be exposed to as many things as possible. But this is for the kind of the young cohort that comes to us straight after school. A lot of other people come to us because they actually know where they want to go. And so it's about defining what it is they need in order to get where it is that they want to go. And that facilitates the process somewhat.
Thanks, Pascale. So, our summit theme again as we finish up. Education Unlimited, think big, drive change, transform learning. So if you had your proverbial magic wand and you could transform something in your university tomorrow that would improve the student experience, the learning experience, what would it be?
A special pill that makes all the academic instantly amnesic.
I like it. I like it. Maybe it's a genetics thing.
Don't know. We're going to do the research on it.
Let's thank Pascale for a class.